Right now, as you watch this video, a digital clock in Manhattan is spinning so fast it's almost impossible to read. It's the U.S. national debt clock, and as we sit here in 2026, it has crossed a staggering milestone, $39.3 trillion. To put that in perspective, that is over $115,000 for every single American alive today. If you tried to pay it off by counting $1 bill every second, it would take you over 1.2 million years. Even crazier. Analysts project that at our current daily borrowing rate of nearly $7.7 billion a day, the United States will officially breach the $40 trillion mark by October of this very year. For decades, politicians on both sides of the aisle have swept this problem under the rug. They told us debt doesn't matter, that the U.S. can just print more money, or that we would simply grow our way out of it. But the rules of economics are catching up. With inflation shaking the markets and interest rates remaining stubbornly high, the U.S. government is now spending more money just paying off the interest on its debt than it spends on its entire national defense. How did the world's ultimate economic superpower get into a hole this deep? Is the system genuinely on the verge of a historic collapse, or is there a way out? To understand where this goes next, we have to travel back 250 years to a time when America's debt wasn't a crisis, but a stroke of genius. The United States was actually born in debt, following the Revolutionary War against Great Britain. The newly formed nation owed roughly $75 million to foreign allies and domestic soldiers. The country was fractured, disorganized, and broke. Enter Alexander Hamilton, America's first Secretary of the Treasury. Hamilton had a radical idea. He believed that if the federal government took on all the individual states' war debts, it would force wealthy investors and foreign nations to care about America's survival. If the U.S. failed, they wouldn't get paid back. Debt wasn't a weakness. It was the cement holding the United States together. And for a long time, the strategy worked beautifully. The U.S. established incredible credit globally. In fact, America became so good at managing its finances that in 1835, President Andrew Jackson did something that has never happened since. Jackson fiercely distrusted banks and paper currency. Through aggressive spending cuts and selling off massive amounts of government-owned land, he paid off the national debt completely. For one brief moment in history, the U.S. debt was exactly $0. But it didn't last. Just 26 years later, the nation ripped itself apart in the Civil War. War is the ultimate engine of debt. To fund the massive Union military machine, the government began printing a new paper currency and borrowing heavily. By the time the Confederacy surrendered in 1865, the national debt had skyrocketed from a modest $65 million to a staggering $2.7 billion. A template had been set. Whenever America faced an existential crisis, it would borrow its way out of it. As the 20th century dawned, the United States transformed into an industrial behemoth. But the global stage demanded global spending. World War I pushed the debt past $25 billion. Then came the Great Depression of the 1930s. To kickstart a stalled economy, President Franklin D. Roosevelt introduced the New Deal. This marked a fundamental shift in American governance. For the first time, the government took on massive debt during peacetime to fund social programs, infrastructure, and public works. But the true fiscal explosion was just around the corner. World War II. To build the planes, tanks, and ships needed to defeat the Axis powers, the U.S. government spent at a rate never seen before in human history. By 1946, the national debt reached $269 billion. More importantly, America's debt to GDP ratio, which compares what a country owes to what it actually produces economically, breached 106%. Now, you might think a 106% debt to GDP ratio would trigger an immediate collapse. But it didn't. Why? Because the post-war era brought an unprecedented economic boom. The U.S. economy grew so fast during the 50s and 60s that even though the dollar amount of the debt stayed relatively stable, the size of the debt compared to the economy shrank dramatically, dropping down to around 24% by the 1970s. America had effectively grown its way out of trouble. But a dangerous lesson was learned. Borrowing big numbers doesn't matter as long as the economy keeps growing. In the 1980s, the financial playbook changed forever. President Ronald Reagan championed Reaganomics, an economic theory that coupled massive tax cuts with massive increases in military spending to win the Cold War. The theory was that lower taxes would stimulate so much business growth that tax revenues would eventually rise. Instead, the gap widened. Under Reagan, the national debt tripled, breaking the $1 trillion milestone for the very first time. Apart from a brief, shining moment in the late 1990s, when the dot-com boom created a temporary budget surplus under Bill Clinton, the 21st century turned the debt accumulation from a steady stream into a Category 5 hurricane. Three massive historical events shattered America's balance sheet in a span of just 20 years. First, the War on Terror post 9/11, costing trillions in multi-decade military operations overseas. Second, the 2008 Great Recession, where the government bailed out failing banks and flooded the economy with stimulus cash to prevent a total economic depression. Third, the 2020 COVID-19 pandemic. When the pandemic hit, the government didn't just step in. It opened a financial fire hose. Trillions of dollars in relief checks, business loans, and healthcare funding were printed and distributed almost overnight. In 2019, the debt was around $22 trillion. By the end of the pandemic response, it had cleared $30 trillion. And today, in 2026, we are staring down the barrel of nearly $40 trillion. So, why is this a crisis now? Why can't the U.S. just keep borrowing forever? The answer comes down to one word: interest. For the last 15 years, the Federal Reserve kept interest rates near zero, making borrowing incredibly cheap. But to fight the rampant inflation that followed the pandemic, the Fed had to aggressively raise interest rates. Because interest rates are much higher now, the U.S. has to pay vastly more on the money it borrows. The federal government is paying an average interest rate of roughly 3.4% on its marketable debt. That means hundreds of billions of dollars are being sucked out of the federal budget every year just to service old debt. Money that could be spent on fixing roads, funding schools, developing technology, or cutting your taxes is instead going straight into paying off the interest on Uncle Sam's credit card. And the demographic clock is ticking as the baby boomer generation retires. Massive entitlement programs like Social Security and Medicare are facing severe financial shortfalls. Within the next decade, the government will either have to drastically cut benefits, heavily raise taxes, or borrow even more trillions just to keep these programs afloat. So, how does this story end? Economists outline three potential future perspectives. Scenario 1, austerity and tax hikes. Politicians finally compromise. They agree to cut government spending across the board and raise taxes significantly on corporations and citizens. It balances the budget but risks slowing down the economy and causing severe political unrest. Scenario 2, out-inflating the debt. The government intentionally allows inflation to run slightly hot for years because the debt is fixed in nominal dollars. Making the dollar worth less effectively makes the debt smaller. The catch: it destroys the purchasing power and savings of ordinary citizens. Scenario 3, the loss of faith. This is the worst-case scenario. If global investors, foreign central banks, and domestic citizens lose confidence in the U.S. government's ability to pay its bills, they will stop buying U.S. Treasury bonds. The dollar could lose its status as the world's reserve currency, triggering hyperinflation and a global economic depression. The U.S. national debt is no longer a theoretical problem for future generations to solve. It is a mathematical reality that is actively shaping the world we live in today. Surpassing $39 trillion is a stark reminder that no empire, no matter how powerful, can outrun the basic laws of arithmetic forever. What do you think is the best way out of the U.S. debt crisis? Let us know in the comments down below. If you found this breakdown helpful, hit that like button, subscribe for more deep dives into the global economy, and we'll see you in the next video.